Nobody taught you how money actually works. They taught you how to earn it. That's not the same thing. You were told, study hard, work harder, be reliable, add value, and the financial results will follow. That's the version of the world handed to most people before they're old enough to question it. And it's not a lie, exactly. It's just incomplete in a way that happens to benefit everyone except you. The people who accumulate real money, not a salary, not a comfortable income, but the kind of financial position that actually changes what your life looks like. They're not operating on those instructions. They figured out something earlier, or someone told them something you weren't told, or they simply paid close enough attention to see the game running underneath the one everyone else was playing. Here's what that game actually is. Money is not a reward for effort. It is not distributed based on who works hardest or who deserves it most. It is a social instrument. It moves through networks of trust and proximity. It pools around people who control access to something scarce: information, relationships, decisions. It flows away from people who signal desperation and toward people who project that they don't need it. You are entering, or already inside, a system that was built before you arrived and will continue long after you leave. The question is not whether the game is fair. It isn't. Machiavelli understood this 500 years ago, writing about princes and republics. And everything he described about how power concentrates, how resources flow, how some people position themselves to accumulate and others stay static regardless of effort. All of it maps directly onto how money moves today. This video covers 6 psychological principles behind how wealth is actually acquired. Not tactics, not hustle advice. The underlying mechanics that most people spend their entire lives never seeing clearly. Some of what follows will contradict things you've been told were virtues. Pay attention to which one makes you most uncomfortable. That's the one doing the most work on you right now. Most people are not losing the money game because they're lazy or unintelligent. They're losing it because they're winning the wrong game entirely. There is a scoreboard most people track closely: salary, hourly rate, title, annual income. Every raise feels like progress. Every promotion feels like advancement. And measured against that scoreboard, they may genuinely be improving year over year. The problem is that this scoreboard doesn't pay out in wealth. It pays out in income. And income and wealth are not the same thing. They are not even close to the same thing. And conflating them is one of the most expensive errors a person can make across a lifetime. Income is a rate. It measures what you receive in exchange for ongoing participation. The moment the participation stops, the income stops. It does not compound. It does not accumulate while you sleep. It requires your continued presence like a toll booth requires a car. You feed it time, it releases money. The exchange closes. Wealth is a different instrument entirely. It is ownership of something that produces returns without requiring your constant presence. Equity in a business, a stake in an asset that appreciates, a position inside a system where decisions about capital get made. Wealth continues operating when you are absent. It compounds. It builds on itself in ways that income arithmetically cannot. Machiavelli makes this exact structural distinction in The Prince, when he contrasts the prince who builds his power on his own arms versus one who depends entirely on mercenaries or borrowed force. The mercenary prince looks powerful right up until the moment his hired muscle decides the arrangement no longer serves them. And then his position collapses instantly because nothing he built was actually his. The prince with his own arms has something that persists independently. It does not evaporate when circumstances shift because it is not contingent on someone else's continued cooperation. Applied to money, the high earner who holds no equity no decision-making authority, no ownership stake in what they help build, is a mercenary. Well compensated. Potentially very well compensated. And structurally fragile in ways they cannot see while the arrangement is comfortable. This is not an argument against earning income. It is an argument about what the income is being used to build. The scoreboard you are optimizing for determines what accumulates. Here is where the behavioral science becomes relevant. Loss aversion, the documented psychological tendency identified by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, where losses register roughly twice as intensely as equivalent gains, makes the visible near-term number feel more real and more important than the invisible long-term position. Trading a higher salary for a role that carries equity, proximity to capital decisions, and transferable relationships with people who control resources will feel like a loss in the month you make the trade. The account shows less. The feeling is of going backward. That feeling is a measurement artifact. You are not going backward. You switched scoreboards, but loss aversion does not distinguish between a genuine loss and a strategic repositioning that looks like one, which is exactly why most people never make the trade, and why the same people who work hard their entire careers end up with income histories rather than balance sheets. The scoreboard you watch shapes the decisions you make. If the only number you track is what lands in your account this month, every decision that doesn't immediately improve that number will feel wrong. And every decision that does improve it, even if it forecloses something structurally more valuable, will feel like progress. Most people spend entire careers winning a game that doesn't compound. The second scoreboard exists. It just doesn't announce itself. Most financial interactions in your life are negotiations. Your salary, your rates as a freelancer, the terms of a business deal, the price of something you're buying or selling, what you pay for a car, what you charge for your time, what conditions you accept on a contract. Negotiations, all of them. And the majority of people enter these negotiations already defeated. Not because they lack confidence, not because they negotiate poorly in the room, but because the most important moment in any negotiation happened before they arrived, the moment the first number was set. This is anchoring. It is one of the most replicated findings in behavioral economics, documented extensively in research by Kahneman and Tversky, and built upon across decades of subsequent work. The human mind does not evaluate numbers in isolation. It evaluates them relative to whatever reference point was established first. That first number, the anchor, functions as a gravitational field. Every subsequent number in the conversation gets pulled toward it. Adjustments are made, but they are almost always insufficient. People move away from the anchor, but rarely far enough. The anchor wins. In practical terms, whoever sets the first number in a financial conversation has already captured a structural advantage before a single word of negotiation has been exchanged. This is not a minor edge. Research on salary negotiation consistently shows that the side which makes the opening offer ends up closer to their desired outcome, and that this effect persists even when both parties are aware of the dynamic. Knowing about the anchor does not neutralize it. The gravitational field operates below the level of conscious correction. Machiavelli's observation in The Prince, that a ruler who allows others to set the terms of an engagement before establishing his own position is already operating from weakness, maps directly onto this. The prince who arrives without having shaped the frame of the interaction finds himself responding to someone else's construction of reality. Responding is always weaker than initiating. Most people, in financial contexts, respond. They wait to hear the offer. They let the employer name the salary range first. They wait for the client to state their budget before naming a price. They see this as polite, or as gathering information, or as avoiding the risk of naming a number that seems too aggressive. What it actually does is hand the anchor to the other party and spend the rest of the conversation fighting the gravitational field that anchor created. The second layer is this. Anchoring doesn't only operate in explicit negotiations. It operates in how you present yourself financially across every context. The moment someone can accurately estimate what you currently earn, what you currently charge, what you currently have, they have anchored you. Your existing number becomes the floor of what they think you're worth. Not your actual market value in a different context, the number they know. This is why revealing your current compensation in a salary negotiation consistently reduces the final offer. Revealing your budget to a vendor increases what they charge you. Revealing your timeline to a counterpart reduces pressure on them to move. Each piece of information disclosed before it's strategically necessary hands the other party a reference point they will use. Mechanically, because that is how negotiation psychology operates. The countermeasure is sequencing. The question is not whether to share information. It is when and in what order. Information revealed early sets anchors. Information revealed after your position is established contextualizes rather than constrains. The same fact, disclosed at different points in a conversation, has completely different financial consequences. Machiavelli understood this as a principle of statecraft. The timing of a disclosure is as strategically significant as its content. A prince who reveals military weakness before an alliance is negotiated receives worse terms than one who reveals the same information after the alliance is secured and the partner is already committed. Identical information. The sequence changes everything. Most people have never been taught to think about financial conversations in terms of sequence and anchoring. They walk in, respond to what they're offered, negotiate from that number, and wonder why the outcome felt decided before they opened their mouth. It was. The anchor was set the moment the other party learned what they already knew about you. There is a piece of received wisdom that most people inherit unexamined, that money follows hard work. Work hard enough, long enough, at the right skills, and financial success is the natural result. This story is deeply embedded in how most people orient their careers and their financial strategies. It is also, at a systemic level, only partially true, and the part it leaves out is the more important part. Money follows hard work when the work is happening in proximity to where capital concentrates. Hard work in isolation, regardless of how skilled or intense, produces income capped by whatever local market you happen to be embedded in. Hard work positioned at the intersection of capital flows, high-value networks, and people with decision-making authority produces something that compounds. The work is not what changes. The position is. Machiavelli writes in The Prince that the wise prince does not simply wait for fortune to act. He creates the conditions under which fortune can work in his favor. Fortune, in his framework, is not random luck. It is a current. And the question is whether you have positioned yourself where that current runs, or whether you are standing on dry land waiting for the water to come to you. Proximity to money is not about networking in the superficial sense, attending events, collecting contacts, performing sociability. It is structural. It is about identifying where capital decisions actually get made and engineering your way into that vicinity. This requires a clear-eyed analysis of your current position relative to those flows, followed by deliberate movement toward them, even when that movement is uncomfortable or seems like a step sideways. Consider two people with identical skills. One takes a role at a company where their ceiling is a modest salary and their daily interactions are with other people in similar positions. The other takes a comparable role, perhaps even paying slightly less, at a fund, or at a company in the pre-IPO phase, or at a firm where they will interact regularly with people who deploy capital. 5 years later, their financial trajectories are not the same. Not because one worked harder, because one was positioned inside the current. The psychological barrier here is that most people assess opportunity through the lens of immediate compensation and familiar context. Cognitive psychologists call this the availability heuristic. We evaluate options based on how easily comparable examples come to mind. When your mental models of a good job or a good deal are built from the environments you already know, options that require moving outside that context feel riskier than they actually are. This is the proximity trap. The familiar environment feels safe precisely because it is familiar, not because it is optimal. And the options that would actually shift your position feel uncertain because you don't have prior experience with them. The structural question is this: who in your current environment has access to capital, makes capital decisions, or moves in circles where opportunity compounds? And what would it actually take to move from your current position into meaningful proximity with those people? Not as an aspirational exercise, as a concrete architecture problem. Distance from capital flows is not neutral. It is a tax on everything you produce. Reducing that distance is not about who you know. It is about where you choose to stand. There is a specific moment in almost every worthwhile financial pursuit where the visible evidence suggests you are losing. Returns are slow. Progress is nonlinear. The people around you who chose faster, more immediately legible paths appear to be ahead of you. And the psychological pressure to abandon what you're building and take the certain near-term option becomes nearly overwhelming. Most people at this point exit. They call it pragmatism. It is actually loss aversion in disguise. Loss aversion. The psychological principle that the pain of losing registers more intensely than the pleasure of an equivalent gain is one of the most well-documented forces in behavioral economics. And its most financially destructive expression is not in dramatic moments of panic. It is in the quiet, seemingly rational decision to exit a position that has not yet paid off, but would have if held. The structure of compounding is asymmetric in a way that makes it psychologically brutal. The majority of the return arrives late. An investment that doubles every 7 years looks nearly flat for the first several years, then begins to accelerate. A skill, a relationship network, or a strategic position that takes 4 years to build may appear to be producing nothing for 3.5 of those years. The value is accumulating invisibly. The visible signal is stagnation, and most people read stagnation as failure. The sunk cost fallacy operates here too, but in reverse. The conventional warning is about holding losing positions too long because of what you've already invested. But there is an equally destructive error in abandoning winning positions early because the return hasn't arrived yet, and because the social cost of appearing to be in a stagnant or losing position is more immediately painful than the abstract future benefit of staying the course. Machiavelli, in Discourses 3.9, identified what he considered one of the central causes of human failure: the inability to change one's approach when circumstances demand it. He observed that men tend to rely on whichever method brought them past success, and cannot bring themselves to deviate from it, even when conditions have fundamentally shifted. What's worth noting, and what most readers miss, is that this principle cuts both ways. The man who exits a sound long-term position because short-term results disappoint is making the same structural error from the other direction. He is letting current evidence override the architecture he built, abandoning a method that was working precisely because the feedback he expected hasn't arrived on his preferred timeline. The practical implication is this: before you commit to a financial strategy, a position, or a path, you need to know specifically what the signal of genuine failure looks like versus what the normal pattern of a working strategy looks like at the difficult midpoint. Those two things feel identical from the inside. The only way to distinguish them is to have defined the difference in advance, before you are inside the discomfort. People who build wealth across a lifetime are not more patient by temperament. They are more patient because they understand the structure of what they're building well enough to hold through the period where everything looks like it isn't working. That understanding is not passive. It is a form of strategic intelligence that most people never develop because nobody teaches it directly. Machiavelli's most enduring strategic concept is the relationship between fortuna and virtù. Fortune, external circumstances, the environment, the currents of events, and virtù, which in his usage does not mean moral virtue, but rather force of will, skill, and decisive action. His argument running through the Prince is that fortune controls perhaps half of human affairs, but the other half is available to those with sufficient virtù to act on it. Fortune, he writes, is like a river. When it floods, it is devastating. But those who have prepared their defenses, built their embankments in calm times, suffer far less when the flood arrives. Applied to the psychology of money, this principle resolves into something specific. The people who acquire wealth consistently are not those who wait for the right opportunity. They are those who have made themselves necessary to situations where wealth concentrates. And they built that necessity deliberately, in advance, before they needed it. Necessity here is not about being helpful or likable or hardworking. It is structural. You are necessary when the cost of replacing you or operating without you exceeds the cost of compensating you well. This is a colder way of thinking about your position than most people are comfortable with. It is also a more accurate one. The question is not, how do I become more valuable, in the abstract? The question is, in what specific system, for what specific person or entity, would my absence create a problem significant enough that they would pay substantially to prevent it? That is a precise question that requires a precise answer. Most people never ask it. They orient toward being generally competent, generally reliable, generally pleasant to work with. These qualities maintain a position. They rarely change it. Manufacturing necessity requires identifying the specific leverage points in a system, the problems that are expensive, recurring, and poorly solved, and building the skills, relationships, or capabilities that make you the person who solves them. This is not about becoming indispensable through busyness or by hoarding information. That is a fragile strategy. It is about being the person who can do the thing that matters most to the people who control resources. The psychological obstacle is that most people build their professional identity around what they are currently good at, rather than what the system currently needs most. Identity protective cognition, the tendency to defend your existing self-concept against information that threatens it, makes it difficult to look at your skills and honestly assess whether they are positioned where demand is high and supply is low. If the honest answer is that you are one of many people who can do what you do, at roughly the same level, the market will price you accordingly. That is not a judgment, it is a structural fact. Necessity is manufactured through specificity. The more precisely you can solve a problem that a particular group of high-resource people desperately needs solved, the less negotiating you have to do about your compensation. Negotiation is for commodities. Necessities command their own price. Everything discussed so far, positioning, information control, proximity, patience, manufactured necessity, is learnable. The mechanisms are not obscure. The information is available. People can understand these principles, recognize their applicability, and still fail to apply them in any consistent way. The reason for this is not insufficient intelligence or insufficient effort. It is the identity ceiling. Identity protective cognition is one of the most well-documented phenomena in social psychology, developed through Dan Kahan's research at Yale. In its original form, Kahan demonstrated that people unconsciously filter and dismiss evidence that conflicts with the beliefs held by their cultural or political group, and that more intelligent, analytically capable people do this more effectively, not less. The mechanism isn't about ignorance. It's about motivated reasoning in service of protecting a self-concept. What the research on financial behavior suggests, and this is an extension of Kahan's framework rather than a direct finding of his, is that the same mechanism appears to operate around money and class identity. People filter, distort, or unconsciously reject paths that would require revising a core belief about what kind of person they are and what they are entitled to have. The identity ceiling in financial terms works like this. Most people carry an implicit set of beliefs about what their financial circumstances should look like. These beliefs are formed in childhood and early adulthood, shaped by family context, social environment, and formative experiences with money. They are not rational conclusions. They are absorbed frameworks, and they function as an upper limit on what the person will allow themselves to have. When someone begins to approach financial outcomes that exceed their identity framework, when income rises above what feels familiar, when wealth begins to accumulate beyond what people like them are supposed to have, a set of unconscious corrective behaviors activates. Spending increases without clear justification. Opportunities get sabotaged through inaction or poorly timed decisions. Risk tolerance mysteriously spikes in situations where caution would have been obviously better. Relationships with money become suddenly careless right when they had been building carefully. This is not self-destruction in any dramatic sense. It is identity homeostasis, the system returning to what it recognizes as its own correct state. The feeling, from the inside, is often explained as bad luck, or as circumstances changing, or as the universe correcting for a period of unusual success. The explanation feels coherent. The pattern underneath it is psychological, not circumstantial. The mechanism to interrupt the identity ceiling is not affirmation or positive thinking. Those tools operate at the surface level of conscious belief. The ceiling is operating below that. What actually works is extended exposure combined with behavioral evidence. When you stay in a financial position that exceeds your prior framework long enough, when you make decisions from that position and see that you do not collapse, when you accumulate evidence that the new level is survivable, the identity framework recalibrates. This takes time, and it requires staying in the discomfort rather than retreating from it, which is precisely what every psychological instinct during that period argues against. The most important financial moves most people will ever make are the ones they talk themselves out of at exactly the moment they are most frightened of success. Know where your ceiling is. It is not where you think it is, and recognizing it is the only way to move through it. Every principle in this video points to the same underlying truth. The psychology of getting money is not primarily about money. It is about the accuracy of your perception, of systems, of other people's behavior, of your own internal sabotage patterns, and of the distance between where you are positioned and where capital actually concentrates. The practical person, the person Machiavelli was actually writing for, does not approach resources through sentiment or wishful thinking. They read the terrain. They identify where the currents run. They position themselves accordingly, hold that position through the period when it looks like nothing is happening, and make themselves necessary enough to the right systems that compensation becomes structural rather than negotiated. None of this requires ruthlessness in the popular sense. It requires precision. A surgeon is not ruthless when they cut. They are precise. The attitude toward financial position that produces consistent results is closer to the surgeons than to the aggressors. Clear-eyed assessment, deliberate action, no sentimentality about the distance between where you are and where you need to be. The behavioral commitment is simple to state and difficult to execute. Stop making financial decisions from your current emotional state and start making them from a clear theory of position. What position do you need to occupy for money to flow toward you rather than away from you? What are you currently doing that actively maintains your distance from that position? What is the first concrete move that closes that gap? Those are not rhetorical questions. Write down your answers before you watch another video, read another book, or consume another piece of content about money. The information has never been the bottleneck. The decision to act on it is. Drop this in the comments. I know where my ceiling is. Then tell me, which of these 6 principles describes the exact problem you're sitting in right now? I want to know which one landed. If this shifted something in how you think, hit like and subscribe. The next video goes deeper into the mechanics Machiavelli laid out for how power actually transfers between people, and what that means for every professional relationship you're currently in. The last thing to understand about money is the thing nobody tells you at the beginning. The game is not about the money. The money is a signal. What you're actually building is a position in the world from which you can act with increasing freedom and decreasing dependence on the goodwill of people who do not have your interests at heart. That is what Machiavelli was actually teaching. Not cruelty, not exploitation. Clarity about how the world operates, so that you can navigate it rather than be carried by it. Start there. Everything else follows.